For those who have joined over the course of the morning, my name is Gillian Wilson. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Economic Development. I'm also Professor of Physics here at UC Merced. And it's my very great honor to welcome California's Secretary of Food and Agriculture, Karen Ross, back to UC Merced as today's keynote. As you've heard if you were present for my keynote remarks this morning, Secretary Ross has been a champion for UC Merced from its inception. She knew that UC Merced was here to stay, in the Valley, for the Valley, and her vision for California is ours too. She was appointed to lead the Department of Food and Ag in 2011 by then Governor Jerry Brown, and reappointed in 2019 by Governor Gavin Newsom. Prior to joining CDFA, Secretary Ross served as Chief of Staff for the U.S. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack. She also served as President of the California Association of Wine Grape Growers and as Vice President of the Agricultural Council of California. Our carbon management discussions today land at the intersection of topics Secretary Ross is truly passionate about: sustainable environmental stewardship practices, water conservation, energy efficiency, and in fostering an agriculture industry that embraces its role as a global and technical leader. Ensuring effective climate adaptation strategies is one of her top priorities. She's the perfect person to help us address the basic tenets of the Roads to Removal report, especially as it might apply to our local agriculture industry. Secretary Ross, it's a delight to have you back on campus. Thank you for your dedication to our region. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Secretary Ross.
Yes, this will cover up the munching of your sandwiches, okay? So first of all, I have to say I am a big fan of UC Merced. I think it has already made wonderful transformational things happen in the Valley, and that will only get better as we have more and more collaborations, symposiums like this, and the vision of not just the Chancellor, who truly is a terrific, terrific champion. I can't think of anybody better for this chapter in UC Merced, but for everyone that I've had the pleasure of working with from the UC Merced faculty, meeting some of the students and the work that's happening. I also want to say that I think UC Merced is so perfectly positioned in the best place of all, here in the Central Valley. Now, when I walked in, I heard Karen Warner talking about in this place and why this conversation and the exciting things that you're talking about should happen in this place for all the reasons that if you weren't listening to Karen, you should have been, because we are a leader in agriculture, and we do an agriculture that is unlike agriculture in other places, especially in the United States. We are the #1 ag producer. We are the #1 producer of specialty crops. From this place, we generate 1/3 of the country's vegetables and 2/3 of the country's fruits and tree nuts. Yes, we also produce 20% of the milk. We have a whole bunch of other things, but 9 of the country's 10 most productive counties are in California, and 7 of those are here in the Central Valley. Now, that's a concentration of many, many farms, all the way from 5-acre farms who are really creating local food access to nutritional products, but also to 4th, 5th, and 6th generation families where multiple family members are part of the family business that's had to grow by acreage or by adding value with processing to be able to support all the family members that want to come into that. But it's also being very, very challenged right now. And that's why I think what my good friend Kate Gordon did while she was part of the administration really helped lead the effort on what we called community economic resilience funds and planning to really make sure that we approach economic development in a very different and holistic way. And it is remarkable to see what's happening around the energy in that. It is now being called California Jobs First, which is what it should be, because if we're going to have inclusive development, that includes all the voices at the table. It should focus on the jobs that can come from that will support families being able to have the lifestyle that everyone deserves. So that's why I'm such a big fan of the BEAM Circular Initiative, because it capitalizes on what we're already doing and making it even more sustainable and environmentally sustainable, but especially leading on our carbon neutrality solutions. It's also why I'm a huge fan, and I want to call out my good friend Joshua Veers, who came to me with the interim chancellor several years ago about this idea for the Future of Food Innovation Initiative. I'm going to close with one thing because I'm very serious about why we should focus on jobs first. That initiative is about ag technology and the ability with our specialty crops to not only be the leaders on the innovation of how those specialty crops are produced, but also generating the technology and the equipment that we can manufacture here with good custom manufacturing jobs here as yet another export from California. But it's also about more ecology, biology as the solutions and less chemistry, and it's about upskilling farm workers. As a part of this initiative, the momentum that has been created by the people from the Community Foundation that are leading this effort, over 12,000 aspirational surveys of farm workers have been completed to better inform our number one goal, which is upskilling the current farm worker workforce for the asset that these people bring to farming and to their communities, and really creating curriculum that will help them with a certification that they want for career ladders within agriculture, for the new technology that will be deployed that won't leave anybody behind. And that has led to the creation of competency-based curriculum that Merced College will be the first of 8 community colleges introducing that this fall. I mean, that is lightning speed to get curriculum through the process like that. And I just want to say that this is possible when we put people first in economic development, when we make sure that all the voices are being heard and that we don't just rush to the new shiny objects, but please don't abandon a renewable resource, which is what agriculture is. The investment in agriculture with sustainable regenerative practices is an activity that is renewed every year with a value chain that represents that for inputs and outputs. And that is about food, as Rosemary said, food as medicine, which for the first time ever, a US summit was held 3 weeks ago in Washington, DC. We can be part of achieving this new economic outlook here in the Valley with better jobs. We can, through the power of procurement of state government and what we're doing in Farm to School, make sure that the 5-acre farmer, the 10-acre farmer, or the 1,000-acre farmer has a local market for climate-smart ag products that's improving the nutrition of our young people, that can avoid the chronic diseases that are costing us so much in our healthcare system. Ag and the innovators and the leaders in agriculture can lead on climate solutions and grow the best, most nutritious food in the world. And so I'm just going to be an unabashed champion for, please don't leave agriculture behind. We're at the center of helping us all achieve better outlooks for all of the families here in the Central Valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. So don't you just love Secretary Ross? I feel more energetic just by being sort of near her. So thank you for thank you for being here. So one question, and then I'd love to open it up to the audience to ask questions as well and make this a little bit more interactive. But maybe to start us off, I'll ask you one thing. We've heard today, and some, the findings that are detailed in this report really paint a picture of a future where we're doing very different things. We're doing things very differently with our trees, with our orchard waste, our agricultural residues. And this requires big changes in terms of how economic systems are working in the state. What I'm curious to hear your perspective on is what makes California a good place from a policy, regulatory, relationships between the state agencies and industry, farmers, et cetera, a place where this stuff can happen, perhaps to advantage over other
Sure.
states? So maybe you can reflect on that.
First of all, because we have such a diverse economy, and that's unlike many other states that are overly dependent on agriculture or a particular sector. In California, we have 12 or 13 really robust sectors in the economy, and we're leaders in a number of those. We're leaders in biotechnology, we're leaders in custom manufacturing, we're leaders with the most venture capital, we're the leaders with the most Nobel laureates. So we have intellectual capital, we have natural resource capital, and then we have economic capital and innovation. I think the marriage of Silicon Valley to the Salinas Valley to the Central Valley is an untapped resource. I think our national labs are a unique resource because we have more than one, and many states don't even have one, let's face it. And it's really, it's been leadership on climate in particular that started with Governor Schwarzenegger, was reestablished, reaffirmed, thank heavens, under Governor Brown. And now with the one-time investments that are so unique, we've had one-time opportunity for investments that are really taking our climate work to the next chapter.
And what are those
It's an
investments?
all-of-government. It's an all-of-government approach. So trying to protect $54 billion of just investments that include, we've invested over $1 billion across all agencies in climate smart agriculture, because we understand that making these transitions involves a certain risk to new practices. We should be partners in helping with that transition to get to the result that we want. We are investing in technical assistance at the Department of Food and Agriculture. We've invested $567 million, healthy soils, on-farm water use and energy efficiency, dairy digesters to renewable energy production, alternative manure management practices. We have pollinator habitat. And of that, we've put over $38 million into technical assistance and capacity building, because this doesn't happen without the network, combined with the new reinvestment and cooperative extension. And so it's an all-of-government approach that's really helping to make this happen. So let's not waste it. Let's make sure we're being strategic about the long-term investments by investing in technical assistance and capacity building. There might be fewer grant dollars coming through the state, but the federal government has them right now, and that leads to critical mass to prove that what we're doing makes a business case.
Great. I'd like to ask if anyone in the audience has a question for the Secretary. Yes, Mike.
You want to talk about biochar at this table? I saw Jack.
Mike from Coragen.
What are the odds?
And Mike, just explain, just very briefly, I know you did last night, but just if you could just explain what is Coragen and what are you guys doing, and then ask your question, because it's interesting and probably relevant.
Yeah, sure. We operate a biorefinery here in Merced where we convert almond shells today, but it could be any agricultural waste, into biostimulants, biochar, and bio-oils. My question for you, Secretary Ross, is what is CDFA and DPR, the state agencies, doing to sort of usher in this regenerative agricultural transformation? What do you think the long-term outlook is for synthetic fertilizers and synthetic chemicals, and how do biologicals play a role in California ag, and then become an example for the rest of the world, as California is on so many levels?
Well, I'm sure the EU would say they were first with their green economy initiatives, especially the ones they're doing in agriculture, which are resulting in a lot of protests, but I'll just leave that for another day. I think that I think it's an important role for government to get the right policy signal, because if we don't take into account all the things that have to be taken into account, we can throw out lots of things and it's not going to give the marketplace. This is the place to make the investment. This is the place to scale up. I think we've done a great job with that, with our scoping plans. I think one of the things that started this was also, for the first time, including a target for natural working lands as part of going from carbon or greenhouse gas emissions to carbon sinks, which then led to and reinforced the investments we're making in healthy soils, as an example. I think we've seen big interest coming from some of our largest trade associations, Western growers in particular, put on the first ever biological summit last year in Salinas. They had 10 different countries there. It was truly international in scope. There they announced an accelerator program. They've already made their first awards. And the mantra is more biology, less chemistry. What we're doing isn't working. we're doing a lot of things based on historical data that goes into modeling. We saw that when we didn't see the runoff 3 years ago, and all of a sudden, everybody accused us of sitting on 800,000 acre-feet of water, which wasn't coming down the watershed. So everybody's looking for new solutions, softer solutions. The market's telling us that, government policy's telling us that, the pollution that's been part of our history, and we can't deny it, we have to lean into it, is telling us that. Sustainable Pest Management Roadmap is out, but this work began before that as part of climate. If we do the right things for climate, we are reducing pollution. If we do the right things on what we need to do for water, we are also improving practices on the nutrient management. So everybody's looking for that. The federal government, with the fertilizer initiative in particular from USDA, has put how many hundreds of millions of dollars into US-generated alternatives to synthetic fertilizer.
So one question I have, I'm going to refer back to Joe Del Bosque, who was on an earlier panel. I think
he left. He didn't want to hear me. Darn it. I just can't understand it.
But one of the things, he made the point that, because of certain state policies, they take all of the tree waste and it's ground up and spread, and it's too much, right? It would be better for them if they didn't have to do that with all of the tree waste. And instead, perhaps we could pursue one of the BiCRS pathways. And the value of that would be you'd remove CO2 from the atmosphere, you'd remove particulate emissions, other things, and the farming operation would be more productive, and he'd have to add less nitrogen to the soil. So I'm curious from your perspective, by what mechanisms can the observations of people like Joe and some of the other project developers here who they're aware of certain changes on the policy level that would be very helpful to their business, to the climate. How does that filter up, and how does change actually happen at the state level to accomplish some of those changes that need to be made to enable this stuff?
I will say it doesn't happen if you're not participating in the opportunities that are presented by what California Jobs First has done within a region. And I will also say, from my friends who have done the hard work at the local level, that agriculture doesn't see itself as part of economic development. That's traditionally been, isn't that what utilities do? I came out of rural electric cooperatives in the Midwest, and so that was like the job of a utility was to help do economic development. And if ag's not at the table, you're not going to be able to give some of that practical, here's what we're looking at, here's how I'm thinking about it on my individual farm and putting that together. I would also say we funded the first trial work on whole orchard recycling, which is what Joe's talking about, with some of our climate smart ag money, because the state, after 20 years of not phasing out a mandated law to phase out open field burning in the Central Valley, finally said 5 years ago, we're going to phase it out, and here's $185 million for the equipment to help find alternatives. Whole orchard recycling proved that it would work, that it would store carbon in the soil, that would leave that residue on the farm. Obviously, there's enough wood chips with all of our orchards and stuff. We all of a government approach. Watch out, hopefully within the next month, we'll be putting out our natural working lands targets, which is a very detailed report that is a result of AB 1757, and you will see all the ways that every agency in government is thinking about these quote-unquote waste streams, but these byproduct streams can be used on state lands, on state properties, and all the ways it can be deployed. So trying to think holistically, but first of all, ag, for one, needs to be involved in their local community that's working so hard to bring everybody into this conversation.
So you mentioned that a few times. You mentioned ag really needs to be at the table. It sounds like that's an exhortation to ag producers to get more involved. Am I reading that the right way? They're not involved enough.
Yeah. Well, and let's face it, farming is a 24/7 job. And it's hard to say, I'm going to carve out time for that, and all the other ways that ag leaders are asked to be at so many different kinds of tables. It's because ag is the nexus of everything. I used to say when I started at ag, I was like, I want to make sure CDFA is relevant in some of these policy discussions. We haven't been at the table. And now it's like, who do we have that's available to go to the next meeting? Because the good news is we're invited to a lot of meetings now. But ag is a nexus across that. And once you go to that table and you provide that perspective, but you're also hearing from others in your community that perhaps you haven't thought about impacts in the way that they need to be thought about. I think that enriches our community, and together we develop more sustainable, durable results.
Any other questions from the audience? Questions? I'd also like to open it up to those. Oh, sir. Yeah.
I'm Matt Holmes, California Environmental Justice Coalition. Thanks for bringing up the AB 1757 Expert Advisory Group. One of the recommendations.
Could you just describe what that is, just for people who might not know? There's so many acronyms and groups.
Yeah, a bunch of us pointed out that CARB lacked the core competency to evaluate natural and working land solutions with regards to the scoping plan. And a few legislators agreed. And it's been great to see, real clean ivory tower research on what we can do with the excess biomass. And they're calling for almost 8 million metric tons for incorporation into disturbed landscapes. And, we're fallowing agricultural land. We're running out of water. And so I'm curious to hear how because you brought up also the farm workers and the transition. We're going to lose a lot of this feedstock. And who's doing the projections on declines in feedstock? Because we can't just go scrape the forest for the difference.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wonder if I can refer that to the Lawrence Livermore team and ask,
because they've done a lot of work on that biomass availability.
Right, exactly. So whoever wants to take it from that table. But the question is, you have projections on how much we can remove with this biomass, but we're facing declines in biomass. So was that factored in? If not, or to what extent?
Yeah. So
just introduce yourself if you would. Yep.
I'm Corinne Scown. You saw me earlier in the panel. I'll start, and then if Sarah wants to chime in or correct anything, she can feel free. So I don't think we did a huge amount of scenario analysis out into the future in terms of like the specific things that would happen to, say, specialty crops in California in the context of this report. However, that has been done previously. We've done it in my group, the Livermore team has done it, and we've kind of like joined forces and put all that data together. What happens with some of the orchard and vineyard crops is in the near term, you get this like bump in residue because if people are, cutting down the almond trees and stuff, you have a bunch of biomass, but then in the long run that goes down. But we have to remember that the types of organic material that are available in California, not just crop residues, but high moisture and low moisture residues from food processors and stuff, those trends are all over the map. You can look at market projections. There are things like growth in brewery waste. That's like a non-negligible amount of waste. Wineries too. So some of these market dynamics do factor into the long-term availability. But you're right that with water resources declining, you will see some of these crops that are very water intensive where you have a bunch of residues, but you can't count on that in the future. Then it's going to come back down below the baseline.
Can I ask one more question related? I'd love to ask your question to some of the developers in the room, and we'll come to you, Rose. Some of the developers in the room, because you have to go out into the market and you have to find financing for your projects. And in order to do that, you have to make sure you have the feedstock, right? The amount of biomass necessary to supply your facilities. And so you actually really need to figure that out. And you need to have an answer to that question gentleman asked. So I wonder if there are any project, and maybe Josh could pick on you again from Moat, since I know you've thought about this. Great. How do you think about biomass availability in a world where we're looking at a certain declining trend? If you think that's correct.
Yeah, I can say from our perspective in the market for biomass, there's a lot of supply, and we're able to make agreements with a lot of providers. And one thing that helps us do that is to develop long-term relationships with the providers where we can do contracts that help them buy equipment and develop their supply network so that we can have an extended relationship with a number of suppliers, and this includes from farms, from forest management projects, and from municipalities and their urban rewaste. Across this space generally, we see an increasing amount of supply rather than a decline.
Interesting. I want to go to Rose, since you had a reaction to that question. Or wanted to respond.
Thank you. Rosie Burrows.
I'm sorry,
Family
Rosie.
Farms, yep. This question is so important, and I so appreciate and honor all of the depth and breadth of all the subjects that are on this. But for me, one thing that I've been having a great deal of heartache over is the fact that Sigma now is proposing different practices, and people are starting to enter contracts. And on retirement of farmland, which that wording had never been used before, farmland retirement. On one of the workshops I attended, it said, well, we're going to retrain farm workers and we're going to give them a stipend to move. And I think that that is a serious area that needs to be really looked at, and all the stakeholders need to be at that meeting. Go ahead, Secretary.
No, I just was going to say, we have known for a long time, and it's finally being acknowledged, that water availability and water quality, because of climate change, that is the biggest threat to food security on a global basis. And it is something that has to be acknowledged here, and that our infrastructure to be able to grow nutritious food for food security is one of the biggest challenges we face in a changing climate. So we can't abandon that. The fact that there is less water available is going to have some results. I am one of those that's like, let's not talk about permanent fallowing, because technology and improved conservation are multiple ways for being able to have water to grow food. But permanent retirement oftentimes leads to development that has a lot more greenhouse gas emissions as opposed to this land that can be part of a carbon sink solution.
Last question. We're going to wrap up and move to our next panel. Ma'am, if we could get a microphone there.
Mine's a little more in the dirt. I'm a farmer and an ag consultant. Especially smaller scale farms, and it sounds like you're addressing it with more tech support, but it's so hard to do all the paperwork and so sometimes they just throw up their arms and I'm selling this place. Happen a lot more, or getting in trouble. So I hope that your program of more tech support happens. One idea I've had too is have the state develop like a database or a spreadsheet. We can all keep our stuff on a calendar. It'll have its nice little silos. We can draw out a report and send it to the agency that needs it. They don't have access to everything but what we package and send. And let's see, I had one more thing. Oh, with DPR, I hope you can talk with them. I used to be able to set up continuing education classes that had to do with biological control or pest management practices that didn't deal with a EPA registered chemical, and they took that away from us. It has to be chemical only, and that sucks.
That's changed. That has changed, and that will continue to change even more because of the Sustainable Pest Management Roadmap that calls out specifically increased investment in training and education for biological solutions, bio-based solutions, including hours for PCAs and CCAs. And CAPCA, just so you know, is very interested in helping to advance that at an accelerated pace. I also want to say regulatory compliance and the problems of a farmer, whether you're 10 acres or 10,000 acres, having multiple reports to multiple agencies where we don't even have databases within our own agency that can talk to each other. It's an IT problem with needing desperate IT investment and solution to make your life easier. We have a small pilot project that we're doing with the State Water Board to see if we can get to simplified compliance to help reduce that, but it is an uphill battle, and it is a real issue that a lot of older farmers in particular and small-scale farmers are saying, I'm out of here, I can't do this anymore. That's not good for communities either.
Well, thank you. I think
Joel,
we're going to, oh,
May I make one point? And I
very
think that
quickly,
we-
very
yeah.
quickly.
We've missed one thing in all the things that we've talked about, but really the enhancement of our watersheds and the things that we're talking about today. We're talking about carbon sequestration and reduction of planting spacings and all those things. But really, at the end of the day, for me as a Madera County farmer, is that we've got to re-enhance our watershed. And that is a huge task, and that's something that we haven't talked about. So.
And that, I think you'll see evidence of that in this report that will be coming out on the AB 1757, because it's an all-government approach, because it's really thinking about water from the mountaintop to the ocean front. That's how we have to think about water, and that is forest management, watershed management, all soils, no matter where they are, including as part of greening solutions in urban centers for the extreme heat that most people feel is the #1 threat to them as individuals. So thanks for that. Very important point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Secretary.
Yeah, thank you.